Good evening. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are so excited to welcome back Tracee Stanley, one of our favorite folks, to celebrate her new book, The Luminous Self: Sacred Yogic Practices and Rituals to Remember Who You Are. It's a guide to self-remembrance with practices, meditations, and self-inquiry questions inspired by yoga and Tantra to help you connect with your inner wisdom, dreaming rituals, community care practices, journaling, and more. So we're really, really, really happy to have this celebration here. And we're really excited that Dr. Mariel Buqué is with us tonight. Dr. Mariel Buqué is, climbing the charts. We were just talking that her book is an indie bestseller. It's also just a national bestseller. It is called Break the Cycle, a guide to healing intergenerational trauma. And it was just out on January 2nd. So it's only been out about 3 weeks, but it's really the perfect complement to our conversation about Tracee's book tonight. So if you came for Tracee and you didn't really know much about Dr. Bouquet's book, you're going to learn a lot about the connections between these two books. So Tracee Stanley is a teacher of yoga nidra, meditation, and self-inquiry, and the founder of Empowered Life Circle, a sacred community and portal of practices, rituals, and teachings inspired by years of study in yoga and tantric traditions. She is author of the book Radiant Rest, Yoga Nidra for Deep Relaxation and Awakened Clarity, and she created the Empowered Life Self-Inquiry Deck. She's also the Radiant Rest podcast host. She leads retreats and trainings in the US and internationally, and you can find more information about her at traceestanley.com, which we'll drop in the chat. So check all of those resources out. You can also go back in Charis's YouTube channel to watch the Radiant Rest release party at Charis. And Dr. Mariel Buqué is a Black Dominican Columbia University trained psychologist, intergenerational trauma expert, and the author of the brand new book, Break the Cycle. It focuses on healing wounds of intergenerational trauma. Her clinical framework is holistic and infuses ancient and indigenous healing practices into a modern, comprehensive therapeutic approach. During her clinical training, she co-developed and completed a 3-year immersive holistic mental health care fellowship in collaboration with the United States Health Administration and Columbia University Irving Medical Center, where she offered holistic psychotherapy in the Spanish language across multidisciplinary clinics in the Columbia hospital system, including cardiology, neurology, obstetrics, gynecology, and primary care. She has utilized her training in holistic care to integrate holistic practices like sound bath meditation and breath work into therapy, which has helped to deepen trauma healing for her clients. She has gone on to provide healing workshops for all kinds of folks and has been featured in major media. I am going to link to her website, which is drmarielbuqué.com, so you can learn more about her work. And also, we will, of course, be linking to the brand new book, Break the Cycle, so that you can break your own cycles, which you're going to be inspired to do after tonight's event. So we want to invite you who are here with us in this space to be in the chat, make yourselves comfortable. You'll have some direct invitations, but you are welcome to say what land you are on right now, where you're coming from. You will also have an opportunity to ask questions. You can put your questions directly in the chat, or if you see the little question mark on the far right side of the screen, if you're on a computer, you can put them in the Q&A box, and we will begin to integrate those into the conversation towards the end of the conversation. But without further ado, and with great gratitude, please welcome Tracee Stanley and Dr. Mariel Buqué.
Thank you so much, ER. Appreciate being here.
Beautiful introduction and segue, and grateful to be with you always whenever I get an opportunity to be with you, uplift you. So grateful to be here with you, Tracee.
Thank you. I'm so honored.
Yeah.
So let's see. I see a few people I know here in the chat. Giovanna, good to see you. And I'm just wondering, because the timing of our talk is just so auspicious, because we're still in that portal of the new year. And I would just love everybody to just tune in for a moment and let's just center before we get officially started. Just by taking a few deep breaths in and out. And as you take those breaths in and out, perhaps you begin to feel the spine as the central axis of the body. And maybe you can begin to feel as though the breath is moving up the spine as you inhale and down the spine as you exhale. And maybe you can even visualize or sense or feel that your spine is like the trunk of your favorite tree. And as your next exhale descends down that trunk, just feel as though it moves beyond the base of the spine and that a grounding cord is dropped. And that grounding cord goes through the earth and through the rocks and through the water, through the crystals, and really just moves into the space of the center of the earth, the core of power, the core of fire, of light, of remembrance, of ancestors. And just take 2 or 3 more breaths. Let the energy from the core of the earth rise up as this sense of vitality and groundedness and stability. And perhaps the exhale feels like an opportunity to compost or let go of anything that you are ready to release in this year. And as you feel the breath and the energy moving up and back down for the next 2 cycles, just remember that you have this ability, this power to create a new cycle. And we can start here just with how we are thinking and receiving and feeling the breath and seeing and imagining this vitality and this ability to compost what is no longer useful. So take one more deep breath in and out. And perhaps there is a word that you have chosen to live with or to explore for this year that we're in right now. And maybe there's a word that comes forward while we're all talking. And so if you have a word for this year, just go ahead and put it into the chat and slowly come back and open your eyes. So thank you so much, Dr. Mariel.
We are just so fortunate for you. Thank you, Tracee. Thank you for the resetting. Thank you for the centering. Thank you for your existence and just knowing that we needed that. I feel like you're very attuned and grounded and you have a way to really kind of peek into the need of community. So thank you for kicking us off with that. I think it's a beautiful way in which we get to see just your soul and how it operates in community.
Hmm.
That was beautiful.
Thank you for seeing me. Thank you
Always.
for seeing me. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you. And
Yes.
my wish is that we can all be seen for who we truly are. And maybe this conversation can be a beginning to allowing that to happen.
Yes. 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 I think that there is a lot of ground we're going to cover in reference to really centering on who we are, allowing for there to be an opportunity for who we are now to also be in flux, and for there to be some sort of wiggle room for growth, for expansion, but for there to be also a central core that really, like that root of that tree, that core, that trunk that really is just like, is steady. So I think there's a lot we're gonna get into. So I'm excited to dive in, and I really want to, if you would allow me to start with asking you a question.
Yes, please.
Okay. The one of the most important aspects as I see it, and I think as you highlight in your book, that helps us to really navigate the journey into the luminous self is your beginning questioning of
Mm,
who am I? Which
mm,
actually I am a big, as you know, a big tea drinker, but I'm also a big Alice in Wonderland fan. And the caterpillar asks, "Who are you?" Right? And I always
mm,
hear that, like, "Who am I? Who am I in this season? What are the things that remain? What are the things that will come?
mm.
And what will that mold me into being?" And a part of my question for you, because I think you highlight for us a beautiful way to follow that journey, who am I? My question for you is in reference to for those of us that tend to look in and feel like, wow, I'm really unsure.
Mm,
I don't really know where the center is. I don't really know where like the core of me is. And
mm,
that can be so unsettling. And that's why some of us don't want to look in because we don't want to find that.
mhm.
Where can you like help us to really kind of what's the beginning moment of really processing and like going in the direction of really finding that truth?
I love this question. I love this question because the inquiry of who am I is probably the most essential question that we need to answer in our lifetime. I really think it's one of the purposes of our life is to answer that question and know the answer and know that we know the answer. And so, because it's such a deep question, and because that question, a lot of times when we answer that question with the labels, with the certifications, with the accolades, with the memory of what other people have told us that we are. And we wind up feeling like an imposter because there's something around that, those labels and those accreditations that are impermanent. They come and they go according to, as you just said, the season of life changes, but there's some part of us that remains the same. And I think that's the question that we need to get into as far as asking, who am I really? So I'd love to read actually a part of the book because the question that I like to ask is, who am I not? Is that sometimes we have to sort of peel back all the layers of who we are not before we can even begin to touch who we really are, because there are so many stories and so much conditioning. So let me read this part of the book, Who Am I Not? Imposter syndrome. And this is something that comes up often in classes where people will say to me, I really feel like an imposter. Imposter syndrome is a psychological term referring to a pattern of behavior where people doubt their accomplishments and have a persistent, often internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. Not an actual disorder. The term was coined by clinical psychologists Pauline Clance and Susan Imes in 1978 when they found that despite having adequate external evidence of accomplishments, people with imposter syndrome remained convinced that they don't deserve the success they have. And that is a definition from Psychology Today. And when they did these studies back in the 70s, they found that women suffered more from imposter syndrome than anyone else. So, most people who describe experiencing imposter syndrome share that they feel like they are faking it. They don't know enough. They need one more training or certification to prove that they can do the thing. It's a pervasive feeling in our society, and it directly relates to our exploration of personality. So let's reframe the last sentence of the description of imposter syndrome that was quoted from Psychology Today. Despite having adequate evidence that we possess intuition, unique genius, and wisdom, people with imposter syndrome deny the call of the true self, ignoring their insights, creative muses, and inner knowing. They are convinced that they don't deserve to experience the inherent joy and power that accompanies sharing their distinct gifts with the world. The world has us believing that we are so unworthy and incapable of fulfilling our dreams and passions that we ignore the whispers of the soul.
Mm.
So when I think of that, it makes me feel into what do we need to do to even hear the whispers of the soul? And for
Mm.
me, I've been able to hear whispers of my soul and connect with my intuition when I become more still.
Yes. The practice of stillness, which I know is a through line in both of your texts, right? It is reflected initially in radiant rest. It is brought back in the luminous self. And it is one of the scariest things that we can do in modern day society. We are structured as a society to not be in stillness, to not be in silence, to not be in tune. So I can imagine it, being something that is when if we're asking people, hey, listen, there's a lot of wisdom that you can tap into that's right here. And we're also asking them to do something that perhaps could elicit fear. How do we get from the fear to the curiosity, the self exploration, the getting into the rest, the getting into the quiet, so that we can find that core self, that truth that negates the imposter syndrome, that negates the intergenerational lies we've absorbed about ourselves, and that gets us into, and I'm going to use your language because I think it's beautiful, that gets us into living in the remembrance of who we are
Mhm.
and not living through the virus of self forgetting and collective amnesia. Still brings me chills.
Yeah.
Um, so please help us. How do we navigate that? Because I think that you have helped me very much through your work, being able to really bring myself into the stillness in a beautiful way. And I want people to hear how you do that for us.
Yeah, I think the first thing is that we have to acknowledge that the overculture really wants us to stay busy. It wants us to stay disconnected because when we are still, we are connected to a source of power. When we are rested, we are powerful. When we are rested, we are actually more productive than we are when we are exhausted. And so the question that I think I'd like to start with, if anyone is listening and contemplating this for themselves, is who would you be at your most powerful? Who would you be at your most powerful? Right? And then we can ask another question. What are three things that would change in your life if you were well rested? And if people want to put anything into the chat, they can. What are three things that would change if you were well rested? And so that begins to open a portal, first of all, just to see the possibility
Mhm.
of what can change. And sometimes that's all we need to inspire us. And a lot of times when people think about stillness or silence, they think about, oh, this person is a meditation teacher. They're going to want me to, sit for a half an hour. All it takes is just a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, to allow yourself to rest. And the more that you do that, the more this kind of awareness starts to bubble up that maybe this is the medicine that I need. And then you start to crave it. And when you start to crave it, you start to eliminate a lot of distractions that are not helpful for you.
Mhm.
You start
Mhm.
to eliminate things that aren't really meaningful, but they're ways in which you distract yourself and that you fill the time with. So
Mhm.
we can just I can give a little, let's say, experience for just, let's do 1 minute to just sit together and see what happens. So if you feel okay to close your eyes or to lower your gaze, you can do that. And just bring your awareness inward just by noticing the ebb and flow of the breath. You don't have to do anything to change it. Just remind yourself that you are worthy of this breath. And perhaps the inhale and the exhale remind you also of your wholeness. Begin to feel the center of the forehead relax or let go or soften. Let the eyes and eyebrows soften. The cheeks, the jaw. Let the tongue soften away from the roof of the mouth. And let the shoulders soften. Notice the arms can soften all the way to the fingertips. The throat can soften. The chest and the solar plexus. The belly can soften. The hips can soften. And the legs can soften all the way to the toes. And for the next 2 or 3 breaths, just feel as though the whole body is breathing. From the tip of the toes to the top of the head, the whole body is breathing. And in that stillness, just ask yourself, who am I? And then ask yourself, who am I not? And then when you're ready, just slowly open your eyes. Just let them blink open like butterfly wings. And so that's a good opening for us to just see something shifts, even within a minute or two.
Absolutely. And how many of us have a moment in our lives, and I'm saying lives, not even in our day, where we get to sit in that stillness, that free gift, and reflect on these questions. Who am I? Who am I not? And really sit with that, with curiosity, with surrender to what comes,
Mm,
and and with the gentleness that you offer us too, because it's helpful, right, to have a container that feels like it's held in compassion and kindness. So I think that is something that we can then take and model, right?
mhm,
When I then speak to myself, I use that same tone of who are you? And I even sometimes I'll use third person, sometimes first person, but sometimes I like to speak to myself um, using the words that are the loving words, the nicknames, the people that have loved upon me,
mm,
that have that have shown me what love is,
mm,
that they use to call me. My grandmother used to call me Kikita. My parents call me Kiki. Mari is what my sister calls me. Nina is what my nephew calls me. And so when I use those words, I soften.
Mm.
Then I can really allow the tension to drop. And it gives me an opportunity to really tune in into truly who I am. It's not what I've done, it's not what I've written, it's not, where I went to get accreditation or whatever it is that I managed to do in this world and the beautiful things that I've been so honored to do. It is like when I go home and I sit on the couch and I get brought this beautiful dish of plantains and fried
Mm.
cheese, and the things that just like really fill my soul. Who am I in that moment? Because that is actually steady.
Mm.
That's been the steady thread. So whatever other journey I take throughout life, that still remains. And so I'm just so grateful for you for just like really bringing that in.
Mm. Thank
I'm
you.
curious. Yes, of course. I am very curious for you being someone who serves in this way. How is that for you?
It's generative. It's not exhausting
Yes.
because it's a natural flow of a giving and of receiving. And I think because the way in which I teach and the way in which I aspire to hold space is non-hierarchical. It is not an arrow with a tip, it's a circle. And in the circle, we're all teachers. And just by someone asking a question or sharing an experience, it becomes a teaching that we're all enriched by. So I just feel like for me, it's a space of teaching is also a space of learning. It's receiving and giving. And I think that my word for the year is reciprocity.
Wow.
So I feel like it is very reciprocal.
Mhm. And I hope you always feel that because what you
Mm.
give is gold. I, I want to talk to you about water. I know you know this
Yes,
already.
yes, let's talk about water.
And people might be thinking the water you drink, especially seeing you drink, but we're actually going to talk about water in a different context, in the context of it being traditionally within the ideas that we have around meditation. We
Mm,
don't necessarily think of water or the elements, right? I
mm,
know that I'm picking one of the elements, and it's partly because I do have a fond connection to it. And in addition to that, there is a specific place in the Luminous Self where are in conversation with me, in which you're talking about the element of water, the undercurrent of fear that is a
mhm,
part of the relationship with water, because water for you has been there's a generational cellular memory imprint that is a
mhm.
part of how you relate to water. Can you take us a little bit through that, and then I can ask my question about, what I want to ask about water, but just maybe take us through what you reference inside of the book in reference to water.
Yeah, and I can even go a little further in some of the things that I didn't share about water in the book. So I have always been someone who's been very connected to water. I learned to swim at a very young age. We had a boat when I was young, so I was used to being in the ocean. And then there was one time where I had an opportunity to swim in the wide open ocean, and I was petrified. And I remember thinking, why am I so afraid of jumping into this ocean right now? I know how to swim really well. I've spent a lot of time in the water. My father is from the Caribbean. This is not something that I should be afraid of. And at the time, I was I was on vacation when that happened, but I was living in California and living very close to the ocean. And I remember one day just driving down PCH and looking out at the ocean and seeing someone who looked like they were standing up on the ocean. And I remember thinking, whatever that person is doing far out in the middle of the ocean, that's what I need to do for my medicine to create an antidote to this fear. And it turned out that they were stand-up paddleboarding. And so I decided that I was gonna learn how to stand-up paddleboard, which meant that I had to go through the waves. And what I realized was that this was not necessarily about the water itself, but it was also about the churning of the waves is what I found to be so frightening. And so I worked with someone who helped me to learn how to read the water a little bit, how to go through the waves. Um, and I'll kind of leave it at that point because there was something that I read in doing the research, which is something that you wrote about the middle passage that came to me. And I was like, oh, this is not from this lifetime because this lifetime is all about being in the water and being on the ocean and being from a family that is very comfortable being in the water. This is old and it felt really old. So I'm going to leave it to you to tell us about the quote.
Yes, and the important thing for folks to understand here is that we have ways in which our cellular memory remembers what our ancestors had to endure. And within the Middle Passage, there was a real tangible imprint of having been extracted from one's land, placed in spaces that were inhumane, and then transitioned into greater inhumanity. So the relationship to water, perhaps even the first relationship to depths of water, it was a relationship that was marked by terror, was marked by uncertainty, was marked by lack of nourishment, right? So instead of water being a source of cleansing, a source of rejuvenation, which is a lot of what water as an element tends to be, right? It tends to be that element within all of the others that really offers us an opportunity for there to be a washing away and a renewal. And that relationship got distorted. And you mentioned, like in your book, for Black people, water represents one of the largest collective traumas we have experienced in the Western Hemisphere. It is important for us to explore our relationship with nature as it relates to the history of our ancestors and their indigenous homelands. And water, as I see it, also has a curative function beyond, and I know we're gonna get into this because I think we both have like a very powerful relationship with that curative element of water and the ways in which it can now transition into a different relationship that is one that not only we get to experience with water, one that does have that medicine, but also, as I see it, it can also be a way that we pay homage to our ancestors and say, I'm going to cleanse the fear that I have with the depths of water for you, for me, and for everything that was done to us as a people. But I saw you smile, so I want to honor like whatever came up for you as far as thoughts.
I always smile when I hear truth.
Yeah.
And when I hear some truth that has the power to heal many people, that to me is something worth pausing on. And I really want to just honor you for bringing this forward because I think that this is something culturally that for me, when I realized this, I'm somebody who does a lot of inquiry. So going back and back and back and trying to come up with where is this fear coming from? And then realizing that the fear is old and not connecting it all the way back to where you connected it to in your quote until I read that quote. It was like, oh, there is more work to do. And what I love about what you said is that we're doing this healing I think, for our generations past, our ancestors past, and also for our future ancestors, because we are the future ancestors. So we're creating the legacy that we're going to leave behind and the legacy of what happens forward. So I'd love to hear you just talk for a moment about how the work that we do now can heal our lineage, because I think that's really important.
Yes, and it is, as you say, a part of our legacy. It's the intentional legacy that we get to leave, which is also already an intergenerational privilege that we hold, that we can say, I am leaving a legacy, something that our ancestors didn't get an opportunity to really proclaim and say and act out. So even more so, those of us that are in this generation having an opportunity, like if we were to really just take a moment
Mm.
and think about the immensity of the privilege that we are holding collectively together, unified in this moment here and now. The fact that we get to be in front of a screen, which means that we have access to technology, access to information, access to healing, and that we get to partake in an exchange of ideas around how we can liberate the self, but also the collective. That the privilege of that, I mean, like the immensity of it, right? My grandmother's mother, her mother, and her mother didn't have that luxury. They didn't have the immense privilege that I have and I hold here in this moment, to be at the receiving end of your medicine, to be with people that want to heal as well, that are with us on this call. It is immense. And I think that sometimes we are situated in that intergenerational privilege. And because we have been, as we've already noted, like conditioned to just be in the autopilot, forget to take a moment to look at the fact that right now we get an opportunity to sit with the knowledge that we are obtaining collectively here and utilize that knowledge to create a different cellular imprint for generations to come. That is beautiful to me. That's just, and that's a part of why I wanted to write in reference to that. I wanted us to have that tool available to us to say, you can actually engage in ways to regenerate your body, create new neural pathways that condition your brain, your nervous system, your body to rest, to ease, to flow, to abundance. And that is a gift that you not only place within yourself, right? Like in your generation, but it is a gift that you pass back to those who couldn't. And it is a gift that you leave for the next generation, either, you know, from a cellular memory imprint perspective, or wisdom you can pass on. Because my nephew, you know, a few weeks ago now, but I keep saying this because I thought it was the most beautiful interchange between him and I. You know, my home tends to be very quiet most days, very, very quiet. And I sit in the quiet a lot. I am that person that I just, you know, just wondering what comes to me. And now a lot because of your work too. I have been intentionally sitting in my dream space just to see kind of where I go. But my nephew came, he's like, it's so quiet here, Nina. Are you going to be okay? And I said, yes, it is. I'm going to be so, so good, because that is the moment where I get to draw on my own insight, on my ancestral insight. Those are the moments when I can really sit with myself, get to know myself better. Who am I, right? Like I really get to sit with that in a deep way. And I get to empty out the clutter. And I'm in the clutter a lot throughout the day, because that's a part of what the work demands. So I want to be out of it at some point in it. And I want to create that cellular imprinting that is now forming to the quiet, and forming to the introspection, and forming to the healing, and sitting in that meditative space like what you've offered us, to sit in the breath, and that my body is registering that. and I get to give that gift to the generations past, future, and myself. So, the work, it really, as I see it, your work, my work, it all has a way in which it is multi-layered. It doesn't just sit in this space right here. It
Yeah.
reverberates.
It is definitely a ripple. It's definitely a ripple. And I would also say, because you mentioned the kind of creation of the new neural pathways and how you're experiencing that, and that for anybody who's listening, it really only takes 30 to 60 days of doing something consistently for a very short period of time with intention for those neural pathways to start to shift, for you to start to feel different, for people to in your space or around you to even maybe remark something about you is different. You seem more calm, you seem more, and then you get to be the person in the family or in the house that everyone else is maybe attuning to your nervous system because you're feeling grounded and they feel grounded in your presence. Just the same way you talked about how when you sit on the couch and you're receiving the beautiful plantains or the meal, that don't we all want to be that person who makes everyone feel safe in their presence? And so that makes me think about something in your book around the intergenerational nervous system. Can you talk about that a little?
Absolutely. It is a very complex web of neural pathways that connect us to the people that came before us and the ones that come after us. I'm grateful that we're kind of like segueing in that direction. And the intergenerational nervous system starts a very long time ago. Unlike, I think, where we've landed with nervous system dialogue in today's day and age, our nervous systems and our being, like our presence, didn't just start as we were forming in our parents' womb. It wasn't just in the mother's belly. It was actually 2 generations prior when our parents on both sides were actually still 5-month embryos inside of our grandmother's bellies. And in those moments, we actually had already developed into a precursor cell. So basically, a cell that would later develop into a full cell. We were already in their reproductive organs. So the reason why I bring the intergenerational nervous system all the way back to 2 generations ago is because we have to take into consideration that if we had a grandmother that was living in the Great Depression, that was living in poverty, that was living in segregation, that was living in domestic disputes, that was having ongoing stressors happening to her day in and day out. Within her own body, she was also having a hormonal upsurge that was actually floating through her bloodstream, and she was ingesting a lot of, namely cortisol, but a number of other hormones that were actually signaling to her 5-month embryo baby, and then to anything that's connected to that baby, meaning you or what would have later developed into you. All of those stress hormones were sending signals that something didn't feel steady, safe, well, right? And so those primary messages that we're already getting as we are 3 bodies in one is that there is a lack of safety and that something feels out of the norm or chaotic in the environment. So fast forward to when we're actually born, right? And we already have, all of this happening. But if we now extract the 3 bodies and we have grandmother, let's say we have father, and then we have, now baby who is, let's say, an emerging adult, you have 3 separate people. But those 3 people are forever connected. And it comes up, especially when you start seeing people together in a room, in multi-generational homes, where you might have the 3 people interacting and one person is feeling triggered by the other. And what they do is that they run away. That's an avoidance strategy. That's a trauma response. They can't tolerate anger. They can't tolerate conflict. And so what they do is that they flee. Now you have, let's say, the father now, let's say grandmother flees. The father, let's say that he's the one that perhaps is the fighter, right? He might engage in that process of wanting to always just fight tooth and nail and just like really defend himself. And so his actual trauma response is situated in the fight response. But we have also yet another person who was a part of those, that three bodies in one, that is the now emerging adult, let's say, maybe 17-year-old kid. And they are someone who tends to usually fawn
Mm.
because they have a parent that is in that trauma response of fighting, and they've resorted to a fawning response in order to bypass the experience of anger and rage. So you have three generations that used to coexist in one, now extracted from one another through the birthing process, who are now collectively triggering one another and having a collective trauma response that is represented differently. It looks different for each generation,
Mhm.
feeds off of each other. And that's the intergenerational nervous system. It's one that has a biological element, but it also has a psychological element that plays into the relationships.
It's so deep, and it makes me think of two things. It's one, that we have to heal this, right? We have to do the work to heal this. And there's so many different ways in which we can work to heal that. I think that the moment that we have the desire to want to heal it, it feels like a portal starts to open for us to understand and maybe receive tools. And I know we both have tools in both of our books around healing ancestors. And then I also think about the times that we're in right now, the polycrisis that we find ourselves in, of the earth shifting and climate changing, the inhumanity of war, the inhumanity of the migrant crisis. There's so many different things that, as you said, people are having these reactions. Like, we're in different times now than our ancestors were, and perhaps more urgent in a lot of different ways, because we have such a flow of information coming at us all the time. So
Mhm.
I wonder, for those of us who are here and listening and knowing, okay, I want to be a really healed ancestor for the future, and I also want to heal what has happened in the past. What do you recommend is the first step, as far as where do we bring our energy? Do we bring our energy to the ancestors of the past, and also try to be in that space of healing ourselves in the now for the future?
I love this question, and I haven't heard it. And really, when we heal ourselves and we work on the healing that is situated in the now, we already send ripples.
Mhm.
So the thing about the healing that is very centralized on us is that it's not selfish healing. What it is a healing that is already taking into consideration that there will be ripples, but also taking into consideration the fact that in that more healed self, in that more um, inner attunement, really, that we're able to then find greater connection to our ancestors and listen to what they needed, what they desired, what our dreams are telling us about how they lived, especially if we haven't had the
Mm.
full story, but we do have the intuition, right? And so it is in the ability to sit with stillness differently now. It
Mhm.
is in the ability to enter dream space in
Yeah.
a very intentional way because you've been doing the work to find how you can settle. It is in that process that I think then we can find greater attunement to also offer the gifts, the intergenerational gifts back. So
Mm.
I am wholeheartedly like a person that really believes in like starting here,
Mhm.
letting it ripple out.
Yeah. I love what you're saying, because it's very connected to inner knowing. And I think that it's really important for us to name that rest is a way of knowing. And
Mhm.
when you rest deeply, you are protected by your ancestors and you can feel their presence. The more you rest, that's been my experience. That working with the elements is also a way to know yourself. So we talked about this idea of water, and water, we are water. We literally have over 75% water in our bodies. And if we can connect not only to the outer element of water, but the inner element of water, there's a lot of knowing there. Our dreams are also a valid way of knowing. There's so many messages that come through our dreams that is not really for anyone else, I don't think, to interpret, but for us to understand and to sit with. And so I also want to add patience is
Mm.
another way of knowing, because a lot of this happens when we can get still enough, quiet enough, patient enough. You know, we're in this kind of convenience culture where we want everything to be an instant gratification. We want it to happen quickly. And I really think that if we can start to cultivate this idea of being a little slower, a little
Mhm.
softer, that we'll get to basically hear the whispers of our soul because we have slowed down. We've slowed down the rhythm of our brain waves, and we're actually able to receive more information, more creativity, more wisdom. Um, so I
Yeah.
love that, what everything that you just said that connects to inner knowing, which I think is also one of our most powerful tools that we can cultivate.
Yes, beautiful. And
Yeah.
I love the idea of the slowness. I do want to the Luminous Self was the one piece of, beautiful work that you've offered us that I did read quickly, only because I had to be in conversation with you a few weeks ago about it. But I actually stayed on Radiant Rest for about a year.
Mhm.
And I believe that all of our texts are the soft texts. Like you sit,
Yes.
you practice them. The tools are there, and you just
Mhm.
really work with yourself. Allow yourself to really digest the work, get back into it. I think that that's really kind of how you really, like, just
Yeah.
internalize the work, and that is sustainable and can really bring you the depths of the insight that I know a lot of us want and need.
Thank you for saying that, because I definitely felt that way when I was reading your book, that this is not just a book that you read front to cover and put away on the shelf or even gift to another person and don't have it for yourself, because you're going to need to refer back. This is something that I feel like is a book that stays with you for a really, really long time, because there's so many practices and so much wisdom and so many reflection questions as well. Um, and I think that I'm going to just say that I feel like this is the age of the soft writing, the writing that allows you to linger with it, the writing that allows you to be in the liminal space and to explore and to question and to then go back again and reread and question again, because we're always in a different season. So I'm just going to call that in for anyone else who might be thinking of writing a book.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. We want the soft text. We desire it, we need it. So yeah, I welcome that with you. And I want to, I think, just be mindful of time. I'm not sure if our stop is in a few minutes, but I know we wanted to offer a moment to lead out and sit with another practice, right?
Yeah, I think I first want to honor Aaron and McCabe, because they have a question in the chat that I just want to. They're saying, I love this conversation and it is providing so much. For either or both of you, how do you work through what trauma is ours and what is generational? And does it matter to separate it for this healing? I think that's an important question that other people are probably asking. So I'll let you answer that first, and then I'll add something probably on the end.
Yes, yes. Trauma has a way of becoming a compounded experience that sometimes it is a bit hard to partial out and just say, this is where my trauma starts and begins, and this is where it, the ancestral trauma that I've inherited starts and begins. And where it starts and ends. So it's really essential to just work with the wisdom that you have, which is the wisdom of how trauma is metabolized within your body, how your mind has been structured to believe certain things about yourself, about the world,
Mhm.
the emotions that tend to become more default for you. Is it shame? Is it guilt? Is it sadness? It is in all of that wisdom that you're starting to gather about yourself in mind, body, and spirit that allows you an opportunity to then, package what generational trauma has manifested in its form in you, and then work with that. Because considering what is theirs and what is mine isn't very fair, I think, or maybe tangible to work with, because it is all in one vessel. And we're just working with the data that now we are carrying in its totality, that we are now the container of. So that's kind of where I would approach it. I don't know, Tracee, what you might think about the question.
Yeah, I think that, in yogic philosophy, there's something called samskara, which is an imprint. And that imprint could be from this lifetime, or it could be from a previous lifetime, or it could be from an ancestor. And so I think that the best thing that we can do when we're doing this work is to be aware of what are the imprints that are affecting my life right now in this season. What are the imprints that are causing me the most suffering, the most discomfort, so that I can start to work on those to unravel, um, not necessarily where they came from, but I can sort of get to a point where, because we think about these imprints like seeds, and that if we're unconsciously watering the seeds, they just keep growing and they turn into trees, and those trees have fruit, and then the fruit drops more seeds, and it just keeps going. So if we can actually burn the seeds, then we actually create them in a way, or we recreate them so that they're inert. And it's not that they ever go away. It's just that they don't have any more power. They don't have any more potency. And so I talk about this actually in the first two chapters of the book. Um, and I think what I'll do is I'll actually read a poem from the book as our ending before we go back to ER.
Mm.
But there are practices, there are timeline practices. The chapter That Which Makes You Fall is That Which Makes You Rise is all about that. But I'd love to just start with this idea of reclaiming your power.
Mm.
The experience of being, a letting go of doing, a presence, eyes seeing beyond the forms, ears hearing the vibration of light, every sense pulsing in and out, a dance of knowing and forgetting, of trusting and doubting, of grasping and releasing. Now just let me remember when I have forgotten. Beauty is transparent. I see truth in divine connection. Knowing is already here. I am whole and connected. I am supported within and without. Let every day be a remembrance, a reclaiming of truth.
Ashe.
Thank you. Thank you. Ashe. ER, we're going to call you back so we can close. And
We are really grateful to get to have this in our virtual space. It means a lot to us when we get to help celebrate important books, especially books that we know are going to help people. There's so much pain and struggle in our lives right now, and so being able to give people tools is just very exciting. So thank you both. I want to encourage folks to click this teal button at the bottom center of the screen to buy the Luminous Self from Charis. And if you would like to buy Break the Cycle, I have just dropped that link in the chat. So one click each and you are done. You also can get to either one from either link, but these are the most direct links. It really does help us when you buy event books from us. So thank you for doing that. And we would love for you, if this is your first time coming to a Charis event, to come to many more. You can just follow along at charisbooksandmore.com. And of course, we're on all the social media. So check us out. Instagram is the most reliable way to follow up on our events. Do y'all have any upcoming events or things that you want to shout out before we say goodnight?
Oh, I have a retreat that's happening in Baja, California, or actually Baja, Mexico. And that is on deep rest, the power of deep rest. So you can find it on my website.
Oh, I know that's going to be good. I will be heading to the Exhale Summit, and we're going to be doing some of the practices reflected in my book, Break the Cycle. So we'll be there doing some good healing. And that's in March. And I believe if you go to the Exhale Summit's website, you'll be able to find where we're headed. Virginia, I believe.
All right, y'all. Well, those are your opportunities. Go to beautiful places, be centered, check those things out. Once again, thank you both so much. Stay safe and well. We appreciate you. And thanks to everybody watching at home. We appreciate you too. Take care.
Thank you, ER. Thank you, Dr. Mariel.
Thank you, Tracee. Thank you both.